Okay, so this is Mirz Hashem, a 10-part series geared towards taking a fresh look at the Makkos. And I've spoken about the Makkos several years, trying to broaden the dimension of the Makkos. They're not just penal or punitive to punish Paro. They serve many, many different purposes: theological instruction, moral correction, social reordering, opening the Jewish imagination, preparing the road to liberty, the road to freedom for the Jews. And I'll put a link on Facebook and Twitter to these old series that are probably 7 or 8 years old. But I want to refresh some of those ideas and look at them from the vantage point. There's a lot of computers in my room, I apologize. Look at them from a lot of Zooms today, so just trying to remind myself of the various shiurim. The fresh vantage point of the coronavirus, with the premise that there were moral lessons delivered to Paro and delivered to the Jews for that matter, and delivered to the world audience through Paro, because I'll say there was some convocation to celebrate Paro and pay tribute to Paro, literally the day that Moshe Rabbeinu confronted him. So Moshe Rabbeinu was confronting Paro, was essentially delivering messages through Paro as a conduit to the entire world. And these are messages that are morally correcting, that are important for us as well. We don't know all the answers about the coronavirus. We certainly don't know the larger theological questions of what a Kodesh Baruch Hu's plan is and why he's subjecting humanity to this. But we do know that we should be searching for moral, cultural, religious, personal messages. And one of the terms, and there are many, many terms for Makkos, there are Makkos and Osos and Magefos, let's call Magefosai, and Mofsim. So the fact that there are many names implies that there are many layers and levels. They're not just to punish or to break the back of Paro. That's been true. Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't have to break Paro's back. He could very just easily remove the Jews from Mitzrayim. This is a debut of monotheism, debut of very important moral messages. And evidently we're certainly not receiving SR Makkos. No one's being spotlighted for punishment. This is a global pandemic. But we sense that there's a spiritual component to this. We sense there are messages we're meant to take away from this. And what are the messages? I'd like to deliver 10 shiurim, which I'm starting tonight. I'll probably move it up a little bit today, a very busy day of shiurim. I'd move it probably back to 10 or 9:30. Today I just have to fit this in, but I want to finish before next Wednesday, B'ezras Hashem, so people can have an entire set. So tonight I'd like to talk about the Makkah of Dam, and in particular 2 components that I think are quite resonant for the current corona pandemic. Number 1, the target of the Makkah. If you look carefully, I may pull up some of the psukim here. Let me see if I can pull up some of the psukim very, very quickly. I have to first, one second, I have to first open the files. Let me open the files first. I should have done this before, I'm sorry. Here we go. I apologize to anyone that's listening. Okay. I'll share the source sheet just to make it a little bit more understandable. I see that Daniel's listening, so thank you for showing up, Daniel. I'll share the source sheet.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Here's the source sheet. Okay, take a look at the source sheet. You'll see that there seem to be 2 targets for the Makkos. On the one hand, the obvious target is the water. The water is converted to blood, no drinking water, no agricultural water, no life. But the word Yaor keeps popping up. Inertze Amayim Avinitzav Talikoso Al Sfas HaYaor. Bizos Amayim Asher Bayaor, Hadaga Asher Bayaor, Ravash HaYaor, Venilu Mitzrayim Nishtos Mayim Min HaYaor. Hadaga Asher Bayaor Mesa, Vayivash HaYaor, Velo Yechlu Lishtos Mayim Min HaYaor. Vayachbru Kol Mitzrayim Siva. If I once counted, I think there are 10 times that the word Yaor is repeated. And in fact, the Abar Benel says that this really was a 2-pronged event. that Moshe, actually Aaron, converted water to blood with all the inconvenience and the iconic symbols of death that connoted. And Moshe targeted the Or. There's two very, very different roles. And a lot of the roles of Moshe Aaron, Rashi already inspects him. Why does Moshe receive the mitzvah? Aaron executes. According to the Barbanel, they're each involved in a very different role, which means that we have to process the Makkot Dam as basically two separate events. One event converting water into blood, which is the typical, and another event debunking, derailing, dishonoring, and disrespecting the Or. So what is the Or? So the Or is, of course, the iconic symbol of Egyptian power and Egyptian ingenuity and Egyptian math and science. Remember, Egypt is not landlocked, but it's part of the African continent. The rainfall isn't as abundant as in some other climates. And what spares Egypt, some of the famines and the shortage of food and the challenges of the rest of the African subcontinent, is this constant flowing source of water, of life, of fish. And the Egyptians learned how to harness that power and dig irrigational ditches and move the water through different canals. And to a degree, this is what positioned them as an agricultural superpower. And they're able to withstand the famines that had afflicted so much of the world, and particularly the African subcontinent. Now, it's hard to read Sefer Shemos in a vacuum. You really have to read it in the aftermath of Bereshis. And this is the role that Egypt plays in Bereshis. They feed the entire world. They're able to withstand the challenges of a famine because of the Or. Now, again, in Bereshis, it's very easy just to attribute it to Yosef and the pre-planning and has nothing to do with the Nile. But it's really not true because they have 7 years of plenty prior to the 7 years of famine. And we don't know that those 7 years of plenty take place in other countries. So it could just be a supernatural event. And in Egypt, the earth is more fertile. And when everyone's suffering in other areas, could be the 7 years of plenty are worldwide, but no one plans in advance. It's equally likely that 7 years of plenty, because the conditions are normal, but they can maximize the potential through the irrigation, through the Niles, through the canals. And that's why all the dreams of Paro take place along the Nile, because that's where the source of abundance will come from, and of course the source of famine when there's a scarcity of that abundance. So for Egyptians, the Nile was far more than just a source of water and life. It became a national icon. It became a source of their national identity. It represented something much larger than just the Nile River. I'm just going to make this a little bit larger. See, I'll make this larger here. Do this. Apologize, I don't know how to make this larger. Okay, stop sharing. Okay, here we go. And part of this is Paro's visiting the Nile every morning. Moshe challenges Hine Nitzav Alein Asfas HaYor. He's visiting the Or, and Moshe challenges him. So Chazal say, why does Paro visit the Or every day? We all heard that cute story when we were kids because he wanted to deny his humanity, to fake the community out. It's a cute story. It has a lot to say about denying your needs and trying to present yourself and posturing for something you're not. But the simple shot is there was either a religious ceremony or a war planning ceremony. How should we irrigate the Nile today? Paro gathered every morning, probably a little bit of both. Remember, when monarchs would rise in ancient monarchies, that was a religious event. Everyone would get up and watch and attend. So Paro's probably attending the Nile either for a religious ritual every morning or for a planning session about how to maximize the potential of the Nile. And Moshe's confronting him right at that moment at the Nile, at that source of power, right as Paro is about to enter into this narrative in which the Nile provides such strength and such power. Religiously, they worship the Nile, but also economically, culturally, and ultimately internationally. And probably the strongest symbol that this isn't just a water converting into blood event, but this is an attempt to debunk, to dishonor, and to disrespect the Nile as a national/religious icon, is the olfactory elements. If you look very carefully at the pasuk, I'll just read it without sharing. It's very clear that both in the prediction of the event, as well as in the execution of the event, there's a lot of foul smell because the fish are dying. So Hashem tells him, "Daga asher bayar tamus." You should inform him that the fish will die. Uva shayar, and the or will start to reek. And indeed, the Torah, just in case you missed it, pasuk chafalef v'hadaga asher bayar mesa. The fish indeed died. Vayiva shayar, and the or starts to smell. Now, smell is a very, very powerful sense. So here you have a Statue of Liberty, a iconic site, I don't want to say kota, but a place that people identify with, are awed by, feel magnetized to, culturally, economically, religiously. And now, not only is it a stinking sewer, you just can't get near it. Remember that smell that hits your nose, and you just have to run as far away as you can. So it's a way to debunk and to dismiss the potency of the Nile religiously, but not just religiously, but culturally. In the past, I've stressed the religious aspect. I want to stress more the cultural aspect. Just mention the pasuk in Yechezkel, which is the Haftarah of Bo, which to a degree combines both Dam and Svardea. But in that scene in Yechezkel, Perek Chavtes, I'll share the screen for a moment because you really have to see the pasuk to appreciate it. So in that pasuk, so Hashem comes and tells Paro, Hine dabel v'amarta ko amar Hashem Elokim hineni alecha Paro melech Mitzrayim. I am upon you, Paro. Hatanim hagadol harovetz betochi orav. You are the big crocodile that's crouching in the Nile. So there's a conflation between Paro's identity and the Nile. Of course, a god king. Kings thought they were gods, and the Nile was their god, but it was really the source of Paro's godliness. So he's crouching in the Nile. Asher Amar, he says, Li Ori, the Nile is mine. Vani Asitini, and I have crafted it. So here's that hubris, that arrogance, that self-deification, that conflation between Nile, God, and Paro. Hashem says to Paro, V'nasati chachim b'lchayecha, I'll put fish hooks into your cheeks. V'dbakti degas yarecha b'kaskis osecha, and I will have the dead fish stick to your, that I'm looking for, to your scales. V'halisicha mitoch yarecha, I will draw you from the Nile. Second, I got the V'halisicha mitoch yarecha, I will draw you from the Nile. It's called degas yarecha b'kaskis osecha tidbak. And I will have all those fish cling to it. It's a bit of a conflation between Dam and Svardea because he's the Tanina Gadol, which is Svardea. Essentially, Hashem is assaulting that hubris that's born out of the strength of the Nile. So if we're going to have to summarize Dam, Dam has two elements to it. Dam is converting fresh water into blood. Dam is also assaulting the Nile as the source of Egyptian power, Egyptian ingenuity. It's a complete shutdown of the Nile. Daniel, yes?
When you're talking about transforming water into dam, it's from a practical point of view that they haven't got anything to drink? You mean right. Like sustenance?
Sustenance, agriculture. But in addition, the Nile as a location has been debunked and has been disrespected. Okay, now, what does this have to do with the coronavirus? Well, you have to take a look at the coronavirus in light of the last 80 years of human history. We're spending a lot of time thinking about what can we learn from the after effects of the coronavirus. We're in isolation. What does it teach us about family values? We're trying our best scientifically to overcome. What does it teach us about the limits of human ingenuity? Well, what can we learn from the culture which modern man constructed that invited the virus and that spread the virus? I mean, we didn't spread a virus. The virus evidently made the leap from the animal kingdom to the human kingdom. But there was a process that took place more or less since the end of World War II, 1945, a process of globalization. We had defeated Nazism. A short while later, 40 years later, 35 years later, we defeated communism, these two great ideologies that challenged freedom of humanity. And all of a sudden, we thought, and we actually lived in a world of common interests, of universal values, of shared values. And those, and the cultural differences between us and national markers, they're far less important than the values that we all held in common: freedom, economic freedom, personal freedom. This, of course, is known as globalization. So France and England and Russia and the United States and certainly the first world felt there was a commonality of interest. We lived in one global village. And of course, the jet fuel that really advanced that process was the internet, because the internet allowed for facile, quick communication, literally a common language, global village, pooled resources, pooled market, pooled information. Everyone had this sense we're trending to a world of commonality. Oh, national differences, cultural markers, ethnic, religious, racial, those are so tribal, those are so ancient. And we all know the challenges that such a trend convey, because real communities are built around common shared individual values. We share religious values, we share racial values, legends, stories, backgrounds, the DNA. And then social media convinced us that we could slip in or substitute false communities for real communities. We didn't have real communities because we were just so attuned to the values we all shared. Now, if there's one icon for globalization, what's our Nile River? What has become our Nile River? It's airline travel. Because without airline travel, as much as we can communicate, we still have to be there at the factory. We still have to visit. We still have to. And airline travel, essentially, it became popular, inches more popular than reality. It wasn't just traveling in a car. There's something exotic about it, and traveling and frequent flyer, and it flattened the world. And we became global citizens. We felt comfortable as road warriors and living everywhere we wanted to. That's our Nile River. And it's not just the Nile River, but it's also responsible for the pandemic, literally. Pandemics need carriers. If a virus erupts in a particular locale in the world, it just infects the locals. And so the Black Plague had to be carried back by I think it was merchant ships. And the cholera outbreak in the early 19th century was carried back by Russian soldiers who were battling in Asia. We don't really fight any wars the last 20 years, the global nature. We just fight missile wars. But it was our travelers, our global travelers that brought, that's why Italy presumably was in the crosshairs, because it's such a hub of international travel. To a degree, that's why Israel is endangered in ways that far outpace its proportionate population, because we're such a crossroads for people traveling from different locations, different communities. Mirz Hashem, we should continue all the strong measures to limit the fatalities. And Mirz Hashem, L'Kadosh Baruch Hu's help in Eretz Yisrael. So that's our Nile River. And it's a question, I think, for humanity at large. I think humanity has to reassess how to create societies of inclusion and embrace and respect and commonality, but also societies that have real communities that are built around common values that only religion, family, ethnicity, race, only these can convey. We can't create. I think we're learning a lot about community. Who do we unite to? And in a very powerful way. We're spending time with our families. We're infecting each other. We're affecting our communities, which is the flip side of saying these are the people we live with. We live with on a fairly constant basis. And it's certainly important for Jews. For Jews, I think we took part in this whole travel extravaganza. And there's nothing wrong with travel. It's how it changes our mindset and our mind space. And certainly the proliferation of kosher food opened doors to Jews across the world. And I'm more connected with the American community, and people aren't from America won't imagine that you can go to major sporting events for the general public with 80,000 people, and there are minyanim that take place during the intermission that are announced over the loudspeaker with kosher food available in special vending areas, but high quality kosher food. So we opened doors and we traveled across the globe. And for us, that's also a question, but we want to feel at one with humanity and we want to feel universalist. And we do certainly during this pandemic. I've spoken about it on many occasions, but at what cost? And we're very successful at learning Daf Yomi. We're very successful at keeping the halachos, very successful at kosher food. But how much is our identity and our national identity and our historical identity, how much of that is eroding or diminishing as we become part of the world and embraced in society? And not just the travel, but the fact that over the last 200 years, society has embraced us and offered us position and title and influence in politics. And so our Nile, our wake-up moment, the icon, that I think stands behind this globalization process that facilitated the process of airline travel, And it's ironic, obviously it's shut down now, and obviously we'll resuscitate it at some point. I think we'll start rethinking. We'll still travel, we'll still do business, but the investment emotionally in travel will change. The second issue of Dam that I think resonates for a Corona generation are the human efforts to try to resolve Dam. And again, I'll share the screen just to show you some of the psukim. What's very clear is the Torah wants us to see, actually on this psukim I didn't, but if I can find some of them. V'nilu Mitzrayim lishtos mayim min ha'yar. When Hashem predicts the Makkah, he says the Egyptians will try to drink water. How they'll try to drink water is not clear. But in the end, they start to dig. So they're digging tributary areas to drink water. It's not clear from the Psukim how successful they were or they weren't, if the Torah is describing their efforts. It seems like from Chazal, the impression is that there was some degree of success, but it wasn't a resounding success. I think their strategy, at least as I can tell from Chazal, was twofold. We're going to try to dig around and find fresh water. We'll also try to purify the actual Nile water and pour disinfectants into the Nile water. Some say doesn't mean that the blood was oozing out of wood and stones, but the Egyptians had some chemical facility to desalinate, but to disinfect the water. That's an important one. It had some mechanism by which, through wooden material or wooden emissions and stones, they were able to take polluted or contaminated water and purify them, and they tried. Means even though the Egyptians tried to purify or disinfect the water, they couldn't. The fish were dying, the water was smelling. According to some versions, they actually tried to drink the blood. You can, in theory, I don't know if it's scientifically proven, but in theory, blood is a liquid. So at some degree, you could probably drink blood if it's thinned out, it could probably provide some of the effects of a liquid. So they tried, but at some point, you can't drink blood with dead fish in it. You can't drink blood with dead body. You can't drink smelly, rotting blood. So there's this whole attention paid to the Egyptian efforts to resolve the crisis, digging around, drinking the blood, purifying the water, some degree of success. Wasn't clear how much degree. Chazal capture this in a very interesting personification of the Nile. That the Nile said, well, if the top level of my water will turn into blood, I'll just flip it, and then I'll flip bottom to top, and the blood will sink to the bottom, which of course, in Chazal's terminology, is a personification of the Nile trying to rectify itself. In science, it means the blood is thicker, so the blood just sinks to the bottom, and the water, fresh water, rises to the top, and then that fresh water became contaminated. So at least to the person watching this event, it seemed as if the Nile was trying to defend itself and ward off this invasion. Say, well, we'll suffer some casualties, and the layer of blood will send out to the bottom, and the fresh water will rise to the top to remain clear and drinkable. However you take it, whether it's Chazal's version of a personified Nile battling against the divine decree, or whether it's the Egyptians digging, cleaning, purifying, trying to drink blood, one thing emerges. Human beings are trying, with some degree of success, are trying to respond, but they're hitting an upper limit, that they're not successful, that the technology just hasn't reached. And I spoke about this earlier tonight, so I'm not going to repeat it, but I'll refer you to this, how our technology, unlike cholera and unlike the Black Plague, we have technology, we know what a virus is, we can heal people. What's really overwhelming us is numbers and mass and size, and we're learning about human limits, not in our inability to understand Hashem, because we really understand this well, but in our ability to deal with the numbers and the volumes that urbanization and mass population in the modern era has created. We're also dealing with another issue, which maybe I'll talk about a little bit later in this series, about we've extended life, Baruch Hashem, and 80 is the new 60 and 70 is the new 50, but we're realizing that there's a certain limit and a certain biological reality that's hard to overcome. And that's why we have to be so responsible and so careful for people that are immunocompromised or people that are advanced in age. But that's not really a dumb issue. What's really the dumb issue is you're watching people. This isn't the magicians trying to outdo Moshe. We'll get that later. These are the technicians and the water purifiers and the farmers and the engineers trying to come up with solutions, and the solutions emerge, but they fall short. And it's a very delicate message within the Corona environment, because you can't spend half your day rooting for doctors, celebrating them. And Israel, I just saw a news item, trying to come up with 3 or 4 different ingenious ways. I had a very long day at men, 7 or 8 Zoom shiurim. So I just stopped in, looked at the news or something. They're constructing 3D printers to make ventilators, and they're repurposing, and they came up with some invention. They could take one ventilator and create 2 pumps so that 2 different sick people can use it at once. And you're rooting for the doctors, and you're rooting for the healthcare professionals, and you're rooting for the heroes who are in the front line. And then you go to Dav and you realize, well, Kadosh Baruch Hu, we have no solution, and we just throw ourselves upon you. It's a more subtle message. We have solutions. Hashem has touched us. Hashem has endowed us with technology and technological ability, but we're coming up short, and we're coming up short in the numbers primarily. And we pray that Kadosh Baruch Hu should give us the wisdom to overcome the numbers, or to flatten the curve, and to allow the numbers to be spread out on a broader scale. And we're realizing human limitation in that field, in the mass and the volume. And the Egyptians were not impotent. It's one thing if you're completely impotent and inadequate, you just throw your hands up and say, I can't imagine ever responding to this. The Egyptians respond some degree of success, but it's not the full success that can save lives. So those are the 2 corona-related issues that I sense in Dam. One is the icon of a culture gone awry, and the debasing or the dismantling of that icon. Number 2 is human ingenuity, empowered by Hashem, successful, but falling short. And Mirz Hashem, each night, we'll try to address a different makkah and some of the particular angles that are corona-related. Just the spoiler for tomorrow, what about the noise tomorrow during Makkot Sfardei? It was very noisy makkah. What does this have to do? Anyway, thank you for joining. I can mention both Robert and Daniel by name, so have a
Thank you.
good night or a good morning in Mirz Hashem, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.